blood-stained, barefoot, clothes torn to shreds. A woman staggered into a motel in the small desert town of Independence, California. Eyes wild with exhaustion, she pleaded for help. But in 1976, this small desert town had learned to fear strangers appearing in the night. The clerk saw only threat, recalling another time when wild-eyed women had wandered these streets. The followers of Charles Manson. He turned her away. Door after door closed in her face. Each motel, each potential sanctuary, rejected her desperate pleas. She limped through the town's empty streets, her bare feet leaving bloody prints on the pavement, until she reached an old, decrepit hotel. There, an elderly couple stood frozen behind their desk, deaf to her weakening cries for help. Just when all seemed lost, the town sheriff walked in. In that moment, he realized who stood before him. He recognized her from the missing plane reports. Lauren Elder, the sole survivor of a plane crash in Sierra Nevada mountains. April 26, 1976, was a cloudless Monday morning in Oakland, California. Lauren, a 29-year-old artist from San Francisco, stood on the tarmac of a private airfield, watching Dr. Jay Fuller, the pilot, remove the tarpaulin from a Cessna light aircraft. She had chosen the sightseeing tour on a whim. Her boyfriend was supposed to be in that plane's back seat, but he had to cancel, so Lauren agreed to take his spot. The plan was to fly out to Death Valley National Park, have a picnic, and come back before dark. Right up until that moment, Lauren had been eager, but suddenly, she had second thoughts. Lauren asked if she could take a moment for the bathroom because her excitement had turned into a sense of panic. She had a premonition not to go. She was not a nervous flyer, having flown in similar small planes before, even with her father, a pilot himself. But this feeling of dread was hard to brush aside. She buried her intuition and stepped forward. Lauren composed herself, returned to the hangar, then climbed into the rear seat of the plane. The aircraft vibrated, eager for takeoff. Dr. Jay Fuller was 36, a respected local veterinarian and her boyfriend's boss. He projected a calm confidence that reassured Lauren as they taxied onto the runway. Jay's girlfriend, Jean, turned around and smiled timidly. She was at least a decade younger, pleasant but quiet. Lauren remembered a group sailing trip in the past. Jean had seemed reserved then too. Lauren figured Jean was just along for the ride, while Jay seemed keen to impress. They accelerated down the runway, crosswinds buffeting the plane, rocking it from side to side. Lauren watched farmland below and felt a rush of excitement once they were airborne. The pre-flight jitters receded, replaced by the joy of photographing the scenery. An hour passed as they flew beyond giant sequoia forests and into the granite gorges of Kings Canyon National Park. Lauren realized she was cold and wished she had a heavier coat. She had only prepared for a mild spring day in the desert. A light jacket, vest top, woolen skirt, and boots. She pulled on a hat she'd packed at the last minute. They had been in the air for about 2 hours when Jay called out they'd soon cross at the Kearsarge Pass. Lauren's ears popped. She could barely make out Jay's words, so she leaned forward to see for herself. All she noticed was a towering wall of granite straight ahead. Yet Jay remained confident, pointing to a slight notch in the mountain range that marked their path. He had a Federal Aviation Agency map with purple dots indicating the route. The Sierra Range extends north-south. They had been flying through an east-west canyon. But as the canyon forked left and right in similar ways, Jay chose the right-hand path by mistake. Jay had only 213 hours of flight experience, with just 46 in that aircraft type. Lauren did not know how dangerous this region could be, nor that the single-engine Cessna, might struggle to climb in these high, turbulent conditions. She also did not know Jay had chosen not to file a flight plan, so no one actually knew where they were. The fatal mistake was navigation. Instead of choosing the canyon mapped out on the left, Jay took the one on the right. They ended up in a deep basin surrounded by towering peaks. Suddenly they realized the problem. The crest line was above them, when it should have been below. That's when the real fear set in. Lauren saw a sheer granite wall outside her window, but Jay still wasn't alarmed. He said they'd feel a jolt crossing the ridge. The engine strained as the plane banked sharply, trying to clear it. Then everything went black for Lauren. When she woke up, she was still in the back seat of the Cessna. Her vision cleared and she saw the fuselage crushed inward, snowflakes drifting through the shattered windows. To her right, the aircraft rested on a steep mountain ridge. Through the front windshield, she noticed the altimeter was smashed, but the needle pointed to 13,200 feet. Jean lay slumped in her seat. Jay, still gripping the steering yoke, turned to Lauren with a bloodied face and a confused expression. Everything was almost silent. Lauren was doubled over, staring at a gash in her right shin that exposed the bone. She looked at Jay, his face covered in dried blood. Huge details kept adding up in her mind. They had crashed, and it was terrible. Jay had a nasty head wound, glass-eyed and distant. He asked if she could move and help him get Jean out of the plane. He seemed compelled to place Jean on the ground outside, perhaps thinking it would help her. Lauren mentally checked her own injuries. Her arm was swollen and hurt badly, possibly broken, but she could move it. There was a fracture and multiple cuts. Still, she forced open the aircraft door and freezing mountain air blasted her face. Only when she set foot outside did she see how narrowly she'd escaped. The plane was angled on a 45-degree slope, jammed into rocks and scree, just 20 feet from the summit of Mount Bradley, a peak they had almost cleared. With Jay's help, she lifted Jean out of the cockpit. Jean was in dire shape, possibly with spinal or neck injuries. She was convulsing and unable to speak. Lauren wedged herself on the steep ground, bracing Jean's head in her lap. Jean's bare feet had turned blue in the cold. She'd been wearing flip-flops for the desert. Lauren stripped off her own socks and put them on Jean, but that was all she could offer. They had to move quickly. She pressed Jay with questions, but he was dazed. The radio was not working. There was no emergency locator, no blankets for Jean. Importantly, nobody knew where they were. Lauren realized how desperate their situation was. No first aid kit, no emergency gear, no blankets, nothing. She climbed to the top of the ridge to get a sense of where they were. At the summit, she saw they were only about 50 feet shy of the east edge, which dropped away sharply. Approaching from the west, the slope rose gradually. Beyond the crest, it plummeted. If they had cleared the summit, they might have tumbled down the eastern side and been destroyed. She recognized some landmarks. Spotting Owens Valley and knowing Highway 395 ran along the Sierra from Los Angeles to Reno. Civilization was maybe 10 miles away. Not sure how to get there, she felt a small glimmer of hope. Back at the plane, Jay leaned against a crumpled door, his face blank with confusion. Lauren said they needed a fire before the temperature dropped further. But there were no matches, only the plane's cigarette lighter. She tried burning every bit of paper, mostly maps, without success. Then she noticed gasoline trickling from a spigot on the wing. She collected gas in any spare bottles, managed to start a small fire over rocks, and fed it dribbles of fuel to keep it alive. She built a small enclosure of rocks to hold the heat. As dusk turned to full night, Lauren struggled to maintain the fire. Without it, they'd freeze. Jean's injuries were severe, and when she stopped responding, it was clear she was fading. A grim realization sank in. They could not save her. However, just before nightfall, Lauren discovered Jean was gone. She had vanished. They searched the crash site in the dark, calling her name, but found nothing. They didn't know whether she had another seizure and slid down the slope or wandered off into the night. One way or another, she is gone. As freezing night closed in, Lauren tried to keep Jay conscious. He withdrew more, offered little help. He wouldn't even keep his hood up, so she repeatedly secured his jacket around him. She became the one in charge, fighting for their survival, though not understanding Jay likely had internal injuries. The fire finally burned its last bits of fuel. Lauren piled hot rocks into the plane's tail section to serve as radiators. She and Jay settled inside, placing the rocks between their feet, thighs, and armpits. Every few minutes she nudged him awake, but he grew delirious. By dawn, Jay thrashed around, insisting he had to get out, hurting Lauren as he struggled. Then he suddenly went quiet. She checked his pulse. There was none. Leaning in, Lauren realized he had died. It was early morning on Tuesday, April 27th, and Lauren lay beside Jay's body, absolutely spent. Hypothermia clouded her mind, and she almost gave in. Then she felt a vivid presence. Her mother and grandmother urging her not to quit. They would not let her slip away. Rallying, she pushed herself into action. She slipped on Jay's socks for warmth, climbed out of the plane, and let the rising sun warm her. She knew she wouldn't survive another night there. Remembering that someone might search for them, she still couldn't wait. She looked down from Mount Bradley's crest and saw Owens Valley in the distance, a possible way out. A dried stream bed snaked through a steep canyon that might lead to the desert floor. If she could descend thousands of feet over snowfields and rocky outcrops, she might reach Highway 395. At around 7 a.m., she began her descent. Even for a skilled climber with gear, it would have been daunting. She wore high-heeled boots and a wool skirt, so she developed a method of punching through the crusted snow and zigzagging from rock to rock. After hours, she came to a 100-foot drop that, in warmer weather, would have been a raging waterfall. Now it was mostly dry. She removed her boots, dropped them to a ledge, and carefully climbed down, remembering a few rock climbing lessons with a friend. 5 or 6 hours later, early afternoon, Lauren had descended thousands of feet. She was running on fumes with almost no food and only some stream water. Adrenaline was wearing off. She started hallucinating shapes, seeing crucified figures, imagining houses. By around 7 p.m., the sun gave a warm glow to Owens Valley. Lauren had lost her boots, so she was barefoot. Sharp ice and rock had receded into dusty desert terrain. She saw lights in the distance, possibly car headlights on Highway 395. She stumbled across a jeep trail and followed it. Distances were deceiving in the desert, but she had no other plan. Finally, around 10 p.m., about 14 hours after leaving the crash site, Lauren emerged on the outskirts of the small desert town of Independence. She could see motels ahead. Relief surged through her. She knocked on one motel door, but the occupant, startled, refused to help, apparently terrified by her appearance. Lauren asked if there was anywhere else she could go. He pointed to another motel across town. She dragged herself there and faced the same rejection. At last, she found an old hotel with an elderly couple at the desk. They were hard of hearing. She tried shouting but had little strength. An awkward tension hung in the room. Then the town sheriff entered. Lauren feared he'd arrest her for trespassing, but he recognized her from the missing plane reports. Realizing she was a survivor, he rushed her to the hospital in the next town. A doctor stitched her leg wound, diagnosed mild frostbite, and confirmed her right arm was broken. She'd also need several teeth capped. Hospital staff were stunned she'd made it out alive. Her father, a former Navy pilot, arrived the next day, having gone to sleep believing she was lost forever. Her mother, with a spiritual outlook, had unwavering belief Lauren survived. Lauren said she felt that spiritual connection throughout the ordeal. While Lauren reunited with her family, an Air Force helicopter located the wrecked Cessna near Mount Bradley. Jean's body was found 120 feet below the crash site. She had not survived. Jay remained in the plane, dusted with light snow. The county coroner concluded a ruptured spleen and internal bleeding compounded by hypothermia caused his death. Later, Lauren learned why people in Independence had initially refused her help. They feared she might be linked to the Manson family cult, once held in the local jail. The women roamed barefoot and wild-eyed. Some locals believed Lauren was another cult member. Eventually, a few of them visited her in the hospital apologizing, and she forgave them. She remained grateful rather than bitter. The crash reaffirmed her belief in a spiritual dimension to life. She could have emerged cynical, knowing people had turned her away. But Lauren understood their reactions and credited a powerful emotional bond with her mother and grandmother for pushing her onward. She felt that connection helped her survive on the mountain, reminding her there were multi-layered realities that people occasionally glimpse. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate your time and hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked what you saw, be sure to check out the other great content on our channel. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more. Thank you again, and see you in the next video.